We'll be called to votes, but I'm confident that if they haven't done it yet, they'll do it in about 15 minutes. But the way it works is you still have, it takes quite a while to get through the vote series, and we'll probably be able to get the testimony of all of you, I think. We'll certainly try, if that's all right with Congressman Takai. We will try that, and we'll just see how it goes. I have an opening statement and a gavel that Emily's about to remind me I have to hit. So we'll just, I want to thank you all for being here, incidentally, and apologize in advance for the nature of these meetings. We have no control over when they call votes. And if we did, it wouldn't matter because everybody'd have a different time. So I'll call this hearing to order and have an opening statement. Good morning. Every June, since I've been chairman of this subcommittee, we've held a hearing of the General Services Administration, the GSA. This hasn't been by design, but because every year they come out with a new idea that threatens the viability of small contractors. Unfortunately, 2015 is no exception. Today we'll talk about the recent proposed rule to improve transparency into federal contracting. While I fully support any effort to give citizens and small businesses greater confidence in how their tax dollars are spent, this is a case of the cure being worse than the disease. As one witness will testify, in its first year, this rule will cost twice as much as the total value of the federal contracts awarded. The price tag could be $800 billion. The proposed rule could mean that small businesses would need to have one employee spend 3 months a year just entering data. Keep in mind, this is data the government already has, but doesn't collect centrally. While I'm all in favor of creating jobs, I don't think forcing small businesses to hire employees to provide data a second time is a worthwhile use of their dollars or tax dollars, because somebody's got to pay for this. Finally, despite what GSA says, we will end up paying for this new rule. Data isn't free. Businesses will decide it's better to sell independently of GSA, which will increase the government's cost to buy, or these small businesses will drop out of the federal market altogether, decreasing competition. In fact, we've already lost over 100 small contractors in the past 2 years. We cannot afford to exacerbate the problem. I look forward to hearing from our witnesses today about the effects of GSA's proposed rule and any alternative they would suggest to improve how the government buys whatever it buys. I now yield to the ranking member for his opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning. The federal procurement marketplace provides an important customer base for small businesses. For many firms, getting listed on the GSA schedules provide an efficient way to ensure their products and services are considered when agencies are making purchases. Purchases made by these agencies off the schedules account for more than $32 billion, or approximately 10% of all federal procurement dollars. In FY14, 35% or $11 billion went to small businesses through these orders. That is a significant infusion into the small business economy, helping entrepreneurs grow their enterprises, retain staff, and even create new jobs. The GSA schedules have a number of benefits for both vendors and purchasing agencies. Most notably, it creates a simpler system that allows contracting officers direct access to the products and services of numerous firms without the need of issuing multiple solicitations for every requirement. For small businesses with limited resources, relative inexperience navigating the procurement process, landing on a GSA schedule can be an important first step towards securing the federal government as a customer. Despite these advantages, there are a number of concerns from the small business perspective with how the GSA schedule system functions and whether small businesses fully benefit from how it operates. For instance, many entrepreneurs have previously presented testimony to this committee detailing how the adoption of the federal strategic sourcing initiatives have negatively harmed their sales and even caused some layoffs. As this type of vehicle is expanded to additional industries and products through the government's new category management initiative, there are continued reservations among small business. And likewise, small firms have expressed similar concerns regarding GSA's proposed rules on transactional data. The rule requires that firms that hold scheduled contracts or other government-wide acquisition contracts to report transactional data through an electronic system. While it appears that much of this data is already available to the GSA, the new rule increases the frequencies of reporting and expands what information firms are required to provide. For small businesses, this could mean significant new burdens and perhaps a decline in their GSA schedule participation. Mr. Chairman, Congress has long recognized that when small businesses provide services or products to the Federal Government, it results in a win-win. Agencies and taxpayers benefit from quality products that are provided at competitive pricing, while small businesses are afforded a chance to grow. As GSA continues seeking efficiencies, it is important that maintaining transparency in the procurement process is not achieved at the expense of small business participation. I hope we can all work together to ensure that these two factors are properly balanced. With that, I thank the witnesses for testifying today, and I yield back.
Thank you. If committee members have an opening statement, I ask that they be submitted for the record. And as you know, you have 5 minutes. We want to hear what you say. So we'll be a little bit, I will be a little bit flexible on that. We'll try to be. We have one panel today. Our first witness is Sheila Armstrong, who is a partner with the law firm of Morgan, Lewis, Bockius. Is that Bacchius? Is that how you pronounce it? Bacchius in Dallas, Texas. She also served as co-chair of the Commercial Products and Services Committee, one of the committees of the American Bar Association's Public Contract Law section. Ms. Armstrong, you may begin. Thank you.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Takai. As mentioned, I'm a partner with the law firm of Morgan, Lewis, and Bacchius. I primarily counsel government contractors on commercial item contracting. So I work with quite a few GSA schedule contractors. And also, as mentioned, I do serve as a co-chair of the American Bar Association's Public Section of Contract Law, Commercial Products and Services Committee. I would like to thank you for inviting me here today to talk to you about GSA's proposed transactional data rule. GSA published this rule in March of this year. What the rule requires is monthly reports from a variety of GSA contractors. This includes both the schedule contractors as well as those who hold IDIQ, indefinite delivery, indefinite quantity contracts, and what we call GWACs, government-wide acquisition contracts, to prepare these monthly reports of all Federal sales made during the prior month. For GSA contracts, the rule will be implemented through a pilot program, which will apply to a limited number of schedules initially. For those contractors who participate in the pilot program, they will be alleviated from a burden, what we call the price reductions clause, which is another compliance clause that's in GSA contracts. In the public meeting that GSA held on April 17th, I attended virtually. My perception of that meeting is that everyone in the room had concerns about the rule, including GSA's own Inspector General. I think GSA was a little surprised about the negative reaction to the rule. There is a transcript that is supposed to be published of that hearing, but I have not yet seen that transcript. The proposed rule raises a variety of concerns. There are 4 which I would like to address briefly today. The first, which I'm sure you will hear from all our panel members about, is the cost of implementation and compliance. GSA has estimated that it will take 6 hours for contractors to implement systems to comply with this rule. I would suggest that for some contractors, it will take 6 hours for them to figure out which of their IT systems hold the various data elements that GSA has required for this rule. That doesn't allow any time for developing a report, ensuring that the report is accurate, and training its personnel on how they will submit that report on a monthly basis. Likewise, the 31 minutes that GSA estimates it will take on average to prepare the monthly reports is grossly underestimated. This could not possibly allow any time for the contractors to actually review the reports to ensure that the data is correct. There's nothing in the proposed rule that suggests what would happen if the contractors submit incorrect data or if they simply remove data because it's obviously incorrect. I think these factors will have a disproportionate impact on small businesses who don't always have in-house resources for things like IT systems, and so they'll have to go to vendors on an hourly basis to bring in expertise to help write these reports and prepare the transactional data. The second problematic area is the potential expansion of what we call commercial sales practice requirements. GSA contractors are required to submit commercial sales practices prior to contract award and during contract performance when certain things happen, like if they go to add products to a contract or increase prices. The proposed rule allows GSA to ask for CSPs at any time. GSA should, although I'm not sure that it understands the implications of preparing new CSPs or even checking the box to say that CSPs haven't changed. This requires contractors to go into their data systems and look at actual discounts on transactions. I mean, we see press release after press release from the Department of Justice stating that contractors have fraudulently provided this information when in reality they just haven't checked. So this is a big concern. Next concern is the cost benefit to collecting this information. We know it's going to cost a lot to collect the information, but what's not clear is what benefit GSA is going to receive from the information. And then finally is the confidential and proprietary nature of the information. Transactional data pricing has always been protected by the courts under FOIA, and GSA does not appear to appreciate, based on comments made at the meeting, that this is the case. So thank you again for inviting me to speak, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Our second witness today is Mr. John Sanford, who is Vice President of NextWin Services. NextWin assists commercially successful small businesses enter and grow into the federal market. You may begin, Mr. Stanford. Thank you.
Good morning, Chair Hanna, Ranking Member Takai. Thank you for the opportunity to testify. As noted, I'm John Stanford and Vice President of NextWin Services. Part of our work is monitoring procurement policy changes and gauging their real-world impact on businesses. Today's topic, GSA's proposed transactional data regulation, certainly gives us cause for concern. As noted, the rule would require vendors to share their pricing information through a new online reporting system. This pricing data, in turn, is a critical part of a larger GSA effort to create a common acquisition platform, an online marketplace with best-in-class government-wide contracts, all reforms with impacts on the small business community. In our view, such impacts can be measured by three criteria: cost, complexity, and opportunity. When viewed through these lenses, GSA's proposed transactional data requirement fails to best serve small businesses. The first, cost, considers how reforms will change the bottom lines of contractors, either through changing compliance burdens, pricing requirements, or altering resources needed to win work. Simply put, business owners ask themselves, will a given change increase or decrease the cost of doing business with the federal government? As written, small businesses would face increased costs under the proposed rule. GSA recognizes the additional reporting requirement will undoubtedly have a cost for affected businesses. SBA's Office of Advocacy and GSA's own Inspector General noted that estimates in the proposed rule appear drastically understated. I know others here today have completed more comprehensive measurements of this cost, and I'll defer to them on providing those details. So estimates of this cost requirement may vary, but nonetheless, there will certainly be a cost. Complexity, on the other hand, measures if a policy change will make selling to the government harder or easier. Essentially, will the federal market be more or less difficult to understand? Or, as I often hear from business owners, am I going to need to hire someone for this? While GSA contends its reporting solution will be user-friendly, our experience is that government data systems are anything but. After implementation, a successful GSA contractor would be required to monitor and update 5 government systems: GSA's eBuy Marketplace, the System for Award Management, Fed BizOps, the 72A Quarterly Reporting System, and now the new Transactional Data Reporting System. For small businesses, this may often be in addition to SBA systems or certification requirements. All in all, a lot of government systems, each with their own complexities. The third criterion is whether a change expands or limits opportunity to win contracts. When considering a policy, business owners ask, will I have more opportunity to compete and win? In our view, small businesses may see fewer opportunities from GSA contracts and vehicles in light of this proposed rule. Horizontal pricing, whereby the government can compare costs of similar items, makes price the critical factor in awarding a contract. Often, however, small businesses offer tailored and innovative solutions that, in conjunction with competitive pricing, make for best value in procurement instead of lowest price. While GSA suggests that pricing will only be one factor in determining best value, it lends significant weight. The words price or pricing appear 165 times in the regulation, while best value only appears 7. Because it is unclear how, if at all, GSA would differentiate similar products to agencies seeking goods or services besides price, we're left to assume that agencies will have to use price as the determining factor. To the extent that this happens, especially for services, small business will suffer. We do applaud efforts to streamline the acquisition process. The simplification of competition and removal of unnecessary costs associated with managing duplicative contracts benefits all parties. We believe, however, that the responsibility for aggregating price-related data should fall on GSA instead of the private sector. Citing the cost of upgrading its data systems, GSA is proposing to ask vendors to report to GSA the details of what was purchased through GSA. This is like asking retailers selling on Amazon to report to Amazon what it sold on Amazon. This seems to be an inefficient way to collect data. Finally, and speaking to the driver behind this regulation, we continue to be concerned about a vision of government procurement that seeks to categorize customized services into narrow categories. Individual agencies and programs under them have unique requirements. While the acquisition process is in need of modernization, a rushed process of aggregating similar but not identical purchases seems ill-advised. It is our recommendation that GSA rethink its approach to transactional data, putting the collection burden on the agency rather than the vendor. One option, upgrading the systems to automatically collect this data, seems to be a common-sense solution that ultimately will have to be done. Why not now? Thank you for holding this hearing today and shining light on an important issue. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Stanford. Next, we have Mr. Roger Walden, who is President of the Coalition of Government Procurement. Believe it or not, we have time. We can break now, but I think we do have time to get through. As you can see, there's 400 people who haven't shown up yet, and so you may begin. Thank you.
Chairman Hanna, Ranking Member Takai, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today to address the effect of GSA's proposed transactional data reporting rule on small businesses. The Coalition for Government Procurement is pleased that the subcommittee is focusing on the role of GSA's multiple award schedules program in promoting strategic acquisition and opportunities for small business concerns. The Coalition is an association of small, medium, and large firms selling commercial services and products to the Federal Government. Our members hold contracts under the Multiple Award Schedule Program, ITGWACs, and major individual agency contracts. The Multiple Award Schedule Program is one of the most successful government-wide contracting programs available, with over 30% of the dollar volume of purchases going to small business concerns. Our members support the program as a valuable entree into the Federal market, but they are increasingly concerned with GSA initiatives that increase the cost of contracting without corresponding value to customers and the American people. One such initiative is GSA's proposed rule requiring that contractors collect and report transactional data on all sales made through GSA schedules and ITGWAC contracts. Coalition members oppose this rule for several reasons. First, the reporting and compliance burden imposed upon contractors will be enormous. GSA estimates this burden will be 6 hours for initial setup and 31 minutes thereafter to administer. A survey of our members indicated that the actual burden greatly exceeds that amount. Respondents to the survey overwhelmingly said that their existing systems do not currently collect the data points GSA is seeking. In order to implement transactional data reporting on a monthly basis, systems would need to be built, or existing systems would have to be customized to collect, consolidate, and report the information to GSA. Small business respondents to the survey reported that it would take on average 230 hours for initial startup time. Large and medium-sized companies estimated that it would take on average 1,190 hours to implement. The monthly administrative compliance cost also greatly exceeds GSA's estimate of 31 minutes. Small businesses reported that it would take 38 hours per month on average to administer the new requirement. Large and medium-sized businesses estimated that it would take on average 81 hours per month. The actual burden of the proposed rule is significant and cannot be absorbed without raising prices under multiple award schedule contracts, resulting in increased prices and costs for GSA customers. Moreover, and most fundamentally, this is data the government already has in its possession. It is GSA's position that the rule's compliance cost is offset by changes to the price reduction clause. The price reduction clause is one of the most costly provisions of MAS contracts, and our members would welcome a real change. The Coalition has long taken the position that the clause should be eliminated, as it has outlived its usefulness in assuring that awarded contract prices remain fair and reasonable throughout the contract term. GSA confirms this view in the proposed rule by noting that only 3% of price reductions result from application of the tracking customer provision of the price reduction clause. Our written testimony addresses this matter in detail, and we note that the changes to the price reduction clause proposed by GSA are cosmetic and do not change the legal liabilities or the burden on contractors. Continuous competition at the task order level, as required by the Federal Acquisition Regulation, assures that prices remain reasonable and eliminates the need for the costly anti-competitive price reduction clause. Second, the proposed rule does not achieve the objective of providing GSA contracting officers information to negotiate fair and reasonable prices. The Federal Acquisition Regulation provides that when conducting a price analysis using prior prices, the prior price must be a valid basis for comparison. If there has been a significant time lapse between the last acquisition and the present one, if the terms and conditions of the acquisition are significantly different, or if the reasonableness of the prior price is uncertain, then the prior price may not be a valid basis for comparison. In other words, the data has to be sufficient for a contracting officer to make an apples-to-apples comparison. The task order data to be collected is simply not comparable to contract-level pricing. And I might add, there are over 7,500 different varieties of apples. Finally, a system that seeks to drive down pricing through constant comparison of individual and hypothetical transactions leads to a downward spiral in pricing that is inconsistent with the dynamics of the commercial marketplace and is not sustainable by industry over the long term. Such an approach will have a significant cost, as it will compromise the government's long-term strategic interests in fostering competition, ensuring best value mission support, supporting small business, and accessing priceless commercial innovation. I want to thank you for your time, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you. And I think because votes are going on, and Congressman Takai is going to introduce our next witness, and we would like to get some questions in, it's probably an appropriate time to break, adjourn for a few minutes. It'll probably be 20 minutes because this vote has to go through, and as you can see, no one's quite there yet, almost no one. And there's one vote after this, so I would guess 20 minutes will do it. And thank you, and relax.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It is my pleasure to introduce Mr. John Horan, a partner at the firm of McKenna, Long & Aldridge here in Washington, D.C. Mr. Horan works in the firm's government contracting, litigation, and white-collar criminal defense practice groups. He has spent 25 years working in government contract law and regularly assists clients selling commercial items on both the GSA and the VA schedules. Additionally, Mr. Horan serves on numerous American Bar Association committees, including serving as the co-chair for the Consumer Products and Service Committee and the vice chair of the Procurement Fraud Committee. Welcome, Mr. Horan.
Thank you. Good morning, Chairman Hanna and Ranking Member Takai. Thank you for inviting me to testify. In my view, GSA's proposed transactional data rule is afflicted with three of the most fundamental problems that a procurement regulation can have. One, it creates a significant, unnecessary, and underestimated burden on contractors, a burden that will be felt more acutely by small businesses. Two, the anticipated benefit to the government is poorly defined and is not likely to be realized. 3, the proposed rule is subject to misuse that could result in considerable harm to contractors, particularly small business contractors. As we've heard, GSA estimates that it will take 6 hours to initially implement the procedures required to capture the transactional data and an average of 31 minutes per month for ongoing reporting. GSA does not provide sufficient detail to analyze how these estimates are flawed, but virtually every informed party who has weighed in on these estimates believes they are inaccurate, including such diverse parties as major industry associations such as the Coalition for Government Procurement and GSA's own Office of Inspector General. Based on my experience, the effort required by the proposed rule will take significantly more time and expense than estimated by GSA. A contractor cannot simply gather and report the information, but also must ensure that the information is current, accurate, and complete. Otherwise, the contractor will risk an allegation of fraud under the False Claims Act, as has been the case with essentially every other form of cost report submitted by contractors to the government. Small businesses, which GSA estimates to be 80% of the contractors affected by this rule, are especially vulnerable to these added expenses because they often operate with fewer internal resources and lower margins than larger businesses. Industry also views the imposition of the burden as unnecessary because the data, as we have heard, is already available within the government. Ironically, GSA rejected modifications to its own databases to fully capture this data as too costly and unreliable, and then imposed these requirements on contractors. GSA anticipates that the transactional data will assist government buyers in determining the best value to the government when making a purchase. GSA also recognizes a point very important to industry, that price itself is not the only element of best value, but there are many other information points in determining best value. According to GSA, important considerations include total cost, desired performance levels, delivery schedules, unique terms and conditions, time considerations, and customer satisfaction. The rule provides no means to obtain or connect this other important information to the transactional pricing data. Without this information, the transactional pricing data required by the rule will be of little or no value in determining the best value to the government, which is GSA's purpose for the rule. Perhaps the most fundamental concern of industry is that GSA and government buyers will use this transactional data to drive down prices without consideration of these other value-added terms and conditions. Contractors that rely on the other value-added terms and conditions will be unable to compete and will eventually leave the government market. This is not an unfounded concern. I have seen contracting officers ignore these other considerations and focus primarily on price repeatedly in contract negotiations. GSA itself acknowledges that it has used transactional data under strategically sourced contracts to drive down prices. Again, small businesses are most vulnerable. Small businesses often operate as value-added resellers or otherwise distinguish themselves based on the value they add to a transaction that is not captured by transaction price. Another fundamental concern of industry shared by small businesses is that the transactional data will not be adequately protected from disclosure. The rule does not describe the procedures that will be used to protect the data submitted by contractors. Industry is concerned that sensitive data will make its way into the hands of competitors, either through Freedom of Information Act requests, disclosures during negotiations, breaches of GSA systems, or other unintended disclosures. In my view, GSA should not proceed with implementation of this rule until these fundamental issues have been addressed. Thank you for hearing me on this important issue, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
And thank you. I'm going to ask Ranking Member Takai if you'd like to ask the first question, since we have no other. Okay, I'd be happy to. It really seems like GSA and everyone else are living in alternate universes. Often you go to a hearing and you really have questions. It seems like this is so, on its face, a bad idea. I wish that GSA was here to defend this. It would be a much more interesting conversation, but I don't think it would be any more helpful, since the preponderance of this is that they don't want to do it because it's too expensive for them, and yet they're asking you to do it, which clearly, even if you took the numbers that are suggested and cut them in half, you would have to say that it's not worth it, particularly since they already have the information, and they simply have to use it the way they want to use it. In my time as chairman of the subcommittee, I've seen GSA demand based efficiency models, their strategic sourcing model, the acquisition, hallways, and category management embraced by GSA. Now we are in transitional data. Mr. Walden, it seems that there is something bigger going on at GSA. I know you monitor this agency. Maybe you can give us some idea of what you think is driving this, what appears to be counterproductive, harmful to small business, and wildly expensive and pointless.
I think,
not to put words in your mouth.
Right. Well, what do I say after that, right? Well, yeah, I mean, I think from GSA's perspective, and I can't really speak for them, they're, they're searching for what they believe and implementing what they believe will drive lower prices. I think that's a huge focus of the leadership, is driving lower pricing on their contract vehicles. And as the other panelists here have indicated, and you've mentioned as well, best value in that context with regard to procurement is vital to meeting customer needs. And I think many of these things, whether it's the demand-based model, it's data reporting, they also have brand part number reporting requirements now and UPC code reporting requirements that, despite conversations with GSA about the cost imposed by those, they're driving to a lower price model. And in doing so, I don't know if it's counterintuitive or contradictory, because to get to where they want to go, they're increasing costs for contractors. They're increasing, this rule is a prime example of that. It's being asked as part of there's a new initiative too, the competitive pricing initiative that's going on, where GSA is not doing its own independent evaluation of the information with regard to horizontal pricing. They're shooting it over the transom to the contractor and asking the contractors to do the analysis to try to explain why their price is not as low as some other company's price. And there's issues, whether it's unauthorized resellers, there's gray market items, there's all kinds of other issues that GSA should be looking at as well. And the increased complexity to try to drive to this lower price model fundamentally is making it harder for companies to compete. They're increasing in complexity. Our members would like to see a focus on streamlining the process, emphasizing competition at the task order level, investing in the electronic systems, whether it's GSA Advantage or eBuy, to make it more efficient, more effective, more transparent. That would provide more opportunities for small businesses across GSA's program. And fundamentally, what we're seeing at the end of the day, and I like to put it in these terms, when you're performing a government contract, there's sort of two types of costs. There's your direct cost of performance, that's actually accomplishing the task or delivering the product that the government wants. Then there's the overhead cost, which is all the administrative cost of compliance with government unique requirements. In the context of the GSA Schedules program, that overhead cost is becoming a larger and larger piece of the pie, and that's not value added to the government or the American people. And the direct cost, the actual performance, is getting smaller, and that's not a recipe for best value in the long run. So at the same time you're seeing a drive to lower prices, you're seeing increased complexity to try to get to those lower prices, and it just doesn't work together.
So it's safe to say that all these reforms cost money and push people out of the market, add to bureaucracy but don't help the process, and at the end of the day actually cost more.
I think that's a fair. that's a fair description of much of what is is with regard to the GSA schedules program in particular.
This isn't anecdotal evidence. This is something better than that.
Well, our members, for example, the transactional data reporting survey that we did, our members indicated clearly that it would significantly increase their costs of doing business with GSA. And we had over 10%, about 11% of our members, we didn't ask this question, but they indicated that they would seriously consider leaving the GSA market as a result. They volunteered that information. That wasn't a question we asked in our survey. But they would seriously consider leaving the GSA market if this rule went through.
Well, I yield to, thank you. I yield to Ranking Member Takaya.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Horan, the initial implementation of this rule is designed as a pilot program with other contracts being included if, in fact, the pilot is successful. Given your conclusions that the anticipated benefit of the rule to the government is poorly defined and unlikely to be realized, how do you think GSA is supposed to figure out if the pilot is successful?
Well, the way I would like them to figure it out is if it actually produces a better value, best value to the government, considering the cost to contractors. I don't think they can do that based on the manner in which the proposed rule is implemented here. What I think we will see from GSA is some type of calculation of, in their view, of cost savings that will be based entirely on prices and without consideration of the complexity of that type of analysis, where you should determine whether the prices would have lowered based on a competition at an order level, and also the offset to those lower prices based on the loss of these other value-added services. And then finally, the consequence of pushing all contractors to lower prices regardless to the competition on GSA schedules, because I think you will see businesses, particularly small businesses, leaving the schedule as it continues in this direction.
Thank you. And, you know, I've been in the state legislature for 20 years, so we've dealt with these types of issues in regards to purchasing from a certain vendor for the lowest price versus the best value. And I know many of you had mentioned that this morning. Small businesses are known for the added value they can provide agencies with benefits such as customer service. Big corporations or big companies can't do that. Mr. Horan, you stated in your testimony that the new rule does not account for such added value. What could this omission mean not only to small vendors but also to the agencies that purchase their goods and services?
I think those other terms that lead to best value could be lost. Again, that it could be, the procurement could be driven to low price only, and as a result of that, the contractors who offer some of these other terms and services that provide best value will lose sales at a minimum, perhaps be driven out of the market. And the flip side of that is eventually government purchasers will lose the opportunity to purchase from those type of contractors that provide best value in a manner that isn't limited to price or low price.
Because they're out of the business, or they're just not bidding anymore?
Because they're out of the business. I mean, there are other issues as well, because there's such pressure on contracting officers to look at only low price that sometimes they will exclude consideration of best value. Right. But ultimately, I think they could be out of the business.
Okay, thank you. The Coalition for Government Procurement Survey, in its survey, small businesses indicate that it would take on average 232 hours to comply with the GSA's proposed rule. Mr. Stanford, has your business done its own estimate on the hours it will take to comply with the new requirement? And do you find the results of the survey to be more accurate than GSA's own analysis?
We have not, and while we've looked at their study and the ABA work, we're also encouraged in accepting their conclusion because also SBA Office of Advocacy and GSA's own Inspector General determined that those costs seem understated.
Their meaning the coalition, not GSA's?
Yes, correct.
Okay. Other than hours spent on compliance, can you discuss some of the other costs that companies like yours will have to face because of this rule?
I won't speak to our company individually, but speaking to the companies we work with as they enter the Federal market, the costs beyond compliance are, for small businesses, are initial costs up front. So if you're getting a schedule, that's an enormous barrier for small businesses. Actually getting into the GSA e-buy system can be a barrier. As we make that more complicated, as we add additional systems, what we hear from businesses is they simply don't have the resources. I think one of the other panelists pointed to a conclusion that this rule would require an extra employee. For the case of a small business that has an innovative solution, they don't have that extra employee. And one conversation is that they're not ready, which is a cost to the government.
Thank you. I yield back.
Mr. Harang? Hardy? Excuse me.
Thank you. Apologize for being late. Mr. Stanford, in your testimony, you had talked about Amazon as an example of how the GSA, and I hope somebody hasn't asked this question already, would place the burden on contractors and report contract information, although the agency already has the data awarded to the contract. To me, this is just another add-on of frustration to contractors. Being a small business individual, I've had to deal with Federal contracts before. It appears to me that this is just another way of government trying to solve their issue rather than take care of the problems themselves that they have the information at their hands. Would you agree to that? In somewhat of that fashion, I have a little bit harder way of saying it, but that's.
Yes, and I think the chairman put it well. Is it's data that the government already has, and it does seem counterintuitive. And there is consensus amongst the panel that this doesn't make any sense. And they're really in the commercial world. It really wouldn't make sense for the person who's acting as the platform to procure the goods to then need to be told what those goods and services cost.
Does anybody believe that that GSA has maybe underestimated the real cost of what this is going to impact to the businesses? Anybody care to address that?
Our members at the Coalition for Government Procurement, we conducted a survey, and I think that's one of the biggest areas it is the biggest area of disconnect between government and industry on this particular rule. The burden itself, and the burden goes to to creating barriers to entry in the Federal marketplace at GSA. The burden goes to increasing costs for the taxpayer and for customer agencies who use GSA. Looking at it, we've addressed it in our written testimony, but at the end of the day, based on our estimates and our feedback from our members, and we conducted a survey where we tried to use GSA's language that they used in the rule and their formula to come up with the numbers based on feedback from our members. It would cost over $800 million just to implement this rule across the GSA Schedules program, and at the same time, GSA estimated $24 million. And at the same time, GSA indicated in the rule that it would be too costly for the government or for it to adjust its systems. And I believe, if I recall, they were talking in the tens of millions of dollars. And what they failed to, I think, appreciate, or to their credit, having a public meeting and asking comment on it, they failed to understand or appreciate the hundreds of millions of dollars that it will cost industry who participate in the GSA Schedules program to comply.
I want to take it another direction. Being a business guy, I worked on bids. I was a general engineering contractor, so put out bids. Now they're asking you to detail everything you got, all your information that you have that might put you in the competitive motion. They're wanting us to provide that information, which they ask for line item bids. I don't have a problem with numbers because my clients and the rest of the stuff, don't you see that being a problem with the way that we're getting hacked around here in this Federal government of maybe those issues of privacy out there? Anybody?
I agree. I think it's a significant concern, and my clients have essentially universally voiced that concern. It's viewed, I think, in industry as competitively sensitive information. The rule isn't clear on how it can be used, or more importantly, I think, how it will be protected. And it will be in the hands of many, many folks, according to GSA's plans. So I think I can say that generally industry is very concerned about that competitively sensitive information will be out there for competitors to obtain. And I guess I would also add that this information could cause harm if it's out there to contractors both in the commercial marketplace and the government marketplace, because this type of pricing information would be valuable for commercial competition as well.
Thank you. My time expired. I yield back.
Yield to Ranking Member Takaya.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do appreciate the extra time. I have 3 more questions. We have heard from all of you about the problems associated with this rule. Ms. Armstrong, in your opinion, is there anything that can be done to reduce the costs associated with this rule to make compliance easier for small business, or should GSA start from scratch?
In my view, I think GSA should start from scratch and look at its own federal internal resources for this data. As we discussed, there's a great risk for contractors providing information to GSA. If the information isn't correct, they can receive allegations that potentially would subject them to False Claims Act liability. So there's a great risk in contractors providing information to the government, which means they have to assure that the information they provide is correct, and that's one of the things that substantially increases the costs. Where it is and we're talking here about federal orders. We're not talking about commercial orders. GSA is seeking information on federal orders. So that information is within the government. I think GSA needs to look at its own systems and develop a way that they can make use of the information already in their possession.
Thank you. And Mr. Stanford, some have argued that the GSA will use this new information to make businesses, force them to lower their prices if they feel the vendor is no longer offering a competitive price. However, small business margins, as many of you mentioned, are extremely low, and they at times cannot afford bulk discounts like the big companies. Is it clear to you what would happen if the GSA wanted to lower a price but a small business was unable to do so?
I think you would have 2 options. Either the small business would leave the federal market if they could no longer bear the small margins to make sure they were profitable, or as in the case for some small businesses that rely 80–90% of revenue in the federal market, they would go out of business.
Okay, thank you. And my last question, and I think many of you mentioned this, has to do with the inability for GSA to really figure this thing out themselves due to their antiquated computer systems. So I just wanted to dig a little deeper, and maybe Mr. Horan, you can spend some time talking about that comment you made in your testimony about it would be just easier for them to upgrade their system so that they can track and monitor the information that they're requesting on their side, rather than leave it to the burden of the small businesses.
Yeah, I'm not certain it'll be easier, but it'll be certainly they would have to face some of the same complexities that they're willing to impose on contractors. But the point I was trying to make is that GSA, likely anticipating the criticism that they're imposing this obligation on contractors, took a look at their system and indicated in the rule itself, the preface to the rule changes, that their systems would require changes because all of this data isn't contained in a single spot, and they would have to undergo the effort. And that's the same effort that concerns contractors. So they were unwilling to take that expense, despite the data being equally available to GSA as the contractors, and are willing to impose that on contractors. GSA, having access to this information, though, could readily create a database or modify databases to do exactly what they want to do. They could gather this information either directly or through transactions from other agencies. They're just unwilling to incur that expense.
Anybody have any more comments regarding this particular question?
Yes. Yeah. I don't know if it's the irony of the situation or not, is that GSA is going to have to spend money to build systems in any event, because the avalanche of data that they would be receiving under this rule, they're going to have to build systems. So why don't they take a look internally and see what's most efficient for them for the government to try to figure out to manage its own data, because they are going to have to build systems. We are talking, when you talk about monthly reporting across the GSA Schedules program, you're talking of hundreds of thousands of transactions, millions and millions of data elements to be reported, accessed, collected. They're going to have to build their own systems as well. And just a couple other points. With regard to the access, the question was great about, with recent events, the security of the confidential information. There's even, another area, and GSA did not, I think the public meeting that was held on the rule, they gained an appreciation of the level of concern across industry with regard to this issue. And even in that context, they have contractors supporting their effort. And there have been questions that I've received of what are the restrictions on those contractors with regard to use of the information that they're already getting that may be commercially proprietary information from other companies. And lastly, just a thought on the question about whether people would have to leave if they're told lower your price. We get reports regularly of companies being asked to either lower their price or remove the item from the contract. And I know, the GSA leadership is taking position that that's not, and they have, to their credit, have said that's not the goal here from their perspective. But at the working level and operational level, contracting officers, almost daily are asking companies to either lower their price because they found a lower price on a horizontal, comparison. If you don't lower that price, you need to delete the item from the contract.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You mean to say that, isn't that in a strange way collusion? Knowing someone else's price and calling someone else and saying, another bidder for the same item and saying you're too high, lower your price?
I
mean, that's a harsh word, but I mean.
Well, I would say it's misguided. I think it's not good procurement policy. Because you get, in this issue, you get into the relative terms and conditions. And is somebody an authorized reseller? Are they not an authorized reseller? Is it a gray market product? Is it not? These are things, due diligence things that GSA needs to be looking at. And ultimately, really what we all want for our customer agencies and for the American people is a fair and reasonable price, a good price to be paid. And it seems like GSA is focusing so much on the contract level price at this level, when the price is paid is at the task order level, which is the level below of competition under the contracts. And the focus is more on this rather than let's get the best, a good price and the best value solution at the task order level. And that's where, from our membership's perspective, the focus needs to be. How do you enhance, streamline, and embrace competition at the task order level so that the American people, customer agencies, get best value products and solutions, commercial best products and solutions.
So they're asking for something that they're not prepared to take from a group of contractors who will incur enormous expense, and ultimately GSA would also incur an enormous expense to accept this, and yet already admits it doesn't have the capacity really to use it. Is that fair, or?
I think it's fair to say that a lot more thought needs to go into the current approach. Our members oppose this rule. We think GSA should start over from scratch and look internally. Our written testimony includes several different recommendations. And I'll point to one, GSA conducting its own internal pilot of collecting its own information or other information of other agencies and seeing how first of all, what data elements are really important. And much of what's being collected ignores the best value context or the nexus of it and terms and conditions that drive price. And most fundamentally, you're talking about transactional price, that task order pricing that's subject to competition. And to the extent they're using it to compare to contract pricing, as I said earlier in the testimony, and we make clear in our written testimony, that's apples and, I don't know, watermelons. I don't know. It's just such a complete difference in terms of the terms and conditions. And that's focus, it seems to me, doesn't get to the important thing. How do you get a better deal and a good business deal for both sides at the task order level? Because ultimately, that's what leads to better government and better performance on behalf of the American people.
Well, we have unanimity here today, everywhere. If there are no further questions for these witnesses, I want to thank all of them for being here today, and thank you for your patience during votes. When drafting this rule, GSA clearly did not understand the burden it was creating for small contractors. I'm going to send the transcript of this hearing to GSA and to the Office of Internal Government Regulatory Affairs. I hope that GSA will either abandon this approach and start over or seriously rework the rule before it becomes final. This is an issue the subcommittee will be monitoring and will continue to monitor. And we look forward to having another opportunity to meet with you if that's important. I ask unanimous consent that members have 5 legislative days to submit statements and supporting materials for the record. Without objection, so ordered. This hearing is now adjourned, and thank you again.